Hey everyone. Tonight we're diving into something a bit gross and definitely not cute. We're exploring the creepy, scary world of medieval dentistry. Back when teeth got yanked out with iron pincers, everyone suffered from hatosis, and anesthesia was just a strong prayer and a pint of beer. So before you get comfy, take a sec to like the video and subscribe only if you actually like what I do here, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. Always fun to see who's joining us from all over the globe. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soothing white noise. And let's embark on tonight's journey together. If you've ever dreaded the dentist, just remember, you're lucky because back in medieval Europe, your dentist might have also been the local blacksmith, and your checkup probably included some screaming. His story as a medieval dentist didn't start with inspiration. Nope. It started with stench. You were born in a shoddy house with a dirt floor and a thatched roof, into a family that believed bad breath was just part of life. No one brushed their teeth. No one even had a toothbrush. Soap was for nobles and skin-sick monks. As a kid, you hated hard bread crusts and dry roots because that was the menu. Cold compresses didn't help teething pain. Pain was soothed with beer-soaked rags and whispered prayers. Everyone thought crying meant you were getting stronger. Actually, your gums were inflamed, and your baby teeth probably rotted before they had a chance to fall out naturally. By age 5, you'd seen a grown man spit gum out at dinner and keep chewing. Your grandma kept her pulled teeth in a bag for good luck, and your dad's smile looked like a crumbling graveyard. Nobody cared. This was normal. And then there was the breath. Oh, the breath. Every adult smelled like a cave full of old cheese and regret. Your friends didn't notice because they all smelled the same. But you had a sensitive nose. Too bad for you. But this was the first sign you might end up in dentistry. At 7, you'd watch the local blacksmith yank villagers' teeth out with horseshoe pincers. The man screamed, bled, then thanked him. You asked too many questions, so they gave you a rag, told you to wipe up the blood, and suddenly you were the assistant. No ceremony, no oath, no official title. But that day, your path was set. You were the kid who wasn't scared of other people's mouths. The boy who didn't faint at blood. The one who could boil pincers and bite back nausea. Congrats. Now you're the unofficial apprentice of the village's least glamorous profession. Your toys are pincers. Your lessons involve pain. And your playmates are the polishing stones clinking sadly in a bowl. You don't dream of being a knight, a poet, or even a scribe. You dream of not flinching when someone yells at your face anymore. And so your journey begins, not with a white coat, but a blood-stained apron and a brutally unlucky fate. Let's be clear, oral hygiene in the Middle Ages was basically a myth. And if it ever existed, it died out around the 6th century. You, the future tooth puller of the village, grew up in a world where people didn't bother cleaning their teeth. They were fancy. And I mean monastery-level fancy. They might chew on twigs or rinse with wine. But most just let nature take its course. And nature was not kind to millers. No toothpaste, no floss, and zero clue that sugar could wreck enamel. Mostly because enamel wasn't even a word anyone knew. The only thing sweet peasants regularly consumed was misery. Though nobles sometimes enjoyed honey disasters, those sweet farmers were regular honey addicts, and by honey, I mean pure agony. Even the nobles sometimes enjoyed this sticky disaster. It rotted their mouths faster. But hey, at least it tasted fancy. You grow up obsessed with dental hygiene and start noticing a pattern. Everyone's breath smells like something died in there, and they bring their friends. Tooth rot isn't a disease. It's just life's ugly truth. You learn to talk from a distance. You breathe through your mouth by instinct. But ironically, that just makes your stink worse. Kids lose teeth early, not from age, but from accidents, infections, or chewing on rocks hidden in bread. By age 10, most folks already have 2 or 3 ghost teeth, aka holes, where something once lived. People just accept it like mud on their shoes or fleas in their beds. Of course, there are herbal remedies. You might chew mint or rinse with vinegar if you're lucky. But mostly, dental care is just hoping the pain goes away before it spreads to your jaw and kills you. Dental care is just hoping the pain vanishes before it spreads to your jaw and kills you. And nobody talks about the gums. Gums are just red, swollen meat that bleeds when touched. And that's fine. Clearly, the idea of gently brushing them with a soft bristled brush sounds like magic. As a rookie medieval dentist, you start eagerly documenting this horror show. You poke teeth with sticks. You learn the difference between wiggling but still alive and dead, but still hanging on. And when someone asks what kind of person you want to be when you grow up, you say, because in your world, there are only 2 kinds of smiles, the toothless and the soon-to-be toothless. So, how do you become a medieval dentist? Simple, you don't need anything at all. No medical school, no license, no exams. You learn by watching other people's pain. The best way to learn is to apprentice with the town's most dedicated man, the barber surgeon, the jack of all trades with blood on his sleeves. He trims beards, pops boils, sets broken bones, and amputates rotting limbs between breakfast and lunch. Of course, he also pulls teeth because why not? And now you're his apprentice. You sweep, and now you're his apprentice. You sweep floors. You hold down screaming patients. You fetch boiling water, not to sterilize tools, just to look impressive. First week, you witness sawing off legs with a dull saw and leather straps for anesthesia. You faint twice. But week 2, you hold the torch. Week 3, you help hold heads still while your mentor yanks teeth out with blacksmith tongs. You ask too many questions, so you get demoted to cleanup duty. Blood, pus, teeth. Your mentor is a practical guy. If it's loose, pull it. If it's black, pull it. If they scream, pull faster. He teaches you that speed beats finesse in tooth extraction. Infection is God's call, not yours. And you get paid more if you pretend to pray first. No textbooks, just gut feeling, superstition, and repetition. You learn which tooth to pull and which one will snap in half, how to tell which tooth to yank and which one will break in 2, making you A when things go south. You know, plan B, blame the devil, blame the diet. Or, in a crisis, blame the stars. Or in a crisis, blame the stars. Astrology is huge in medical theory, especially when abscesses won't drain and patients start foaming at the mouth. Sometimes you help treat, but the mentor always makes sure you're there on tooth pulling days. Because as he says, nothing makes a man look more pathetic than a bleeding face. Slowly, you learn through blood, screams, trials, and horrors. You're not a healer. Not yet. But you're becoming something even more important in the medieval world. A man who can make pain disappear with a price. If you expect a shiny, neatly arranged surgical tray, you're living way too modern. The medieval dentist's toolkit looks like it was confiscated from a dungeon. And you're learning to use each piece. First up thick, rusty, heavy pincers not for teeth, but for horseshoes, ripping flesh, and grabbing stubborn nails. The handles smell like sweaty rust. The grip is debatable, but if it clamps tight and pulls, it's good enough. Next is the tooth key, a small crank that twists a tooth sideways until it pops out. First tries rarely work. Usually, you snap the tooth in half. Then you go mad digging the root out while your patient sobs in a sack. You also have hooks and scrapers. One looks like a shepherd's crook, perfect for snagging stubborn fragments. Another tool looks like a sharp spoon used for scooping abscesses stuffed with moldy bread or ashes. Sterile nope. Not even close. Plus, there's a pestle. Yep, a hammer comes in handy when your pliers give up and you need a little persuasion. You grip the tool on the tooth and whack it hard. If you hit just right, the tooth pops out. If not, the jaw might just shift a bit. Instruments weren't labeled. Some were once used for animal care. Others might have been fishing tools in a past life. You inherited most of this junk from the late barber surgeon's mentor. Tools passed down from teacher to pupil, and so on. One had a notch on the handle, maybe a maker's mark or a grim stat on how many folks died. Hygiene was optional. Sometimes they were wiped with cloth, occasionally passed through fire, not for sterilizing, but to add some drama. Blood stains were considered seasoning. Your job was to keep these tools neat, cleanish, and ready to go. When someone's clutching their jaw, the last thing they want is delay. They want you to act fast and not ask too many questions. These aren't healing tools. They're mercy weapons. In your hands. They decide if a man walks out smiling or never walks out at all. Back in the Middle Ages, dental science didn't exist. But theories, oh, tons. Toothaches weren't caused by bacteria or cavities. Nobody even knew what plaque was. And enamel might as well have been a prayer. So, what did everyone think caused those nasty, pus-filled toothaches and jaw pain? Worms. Tiny, evil, invisible worms. Yep, cavities. These mythical little beasts were believed to burrow into your teeth and chew all day like termites in a roof beam. If your tooth hurt, that meant the worm was hungry. If it cracked in two, the worm had finished its meal. As a newbie dentist, you were taught to look serious while wisely nodding when asked, "Is it worms again, sir?" and answer yes, because, well, it always was. Of course, there was a religious angle. Some said tooth pain was God's punishment for lying, vanity, or eating too much honey bread. Your job was to pull that sinful tooth like you were wrestling a demon with pliers. Patients often asked you to pray before pulling the tooth. You did, mostly to calm them down. And maybe a bit because you were scared too. After all, you'd seen infections spread to the neck and kill a man in days. Divine intervention was definitely involved. Right, but the most popular belief, the one your teacher swore by, was that if you placed a roasted onion next to the aching tooth. The worm would crawl out. Of course, all you saw was steam and tears. No worms. But the patient believed it anyway. Medieval double therapy magic placebo and onion breath. You even learned a few worm-luring rituals. One was whispering to the tooth, threatening the worm. Another was heating a mix of wax, herbs, and goat fat, then dripping it near the gums to smoke the worm out. Spoiler, it never worked. Eventually, you accepted the truth. Not about worms, but about belief. People want a reason for their pain, no matter how absurd. Imagining a hungry worm is easier than facing decay, disease, and death. And so, you keep going. Barber, priest, bug exterminator. Just another day in the medieval mouth monster world. You watched your teacher yank dozens of teeth from groaning villagers. You held their heads steady, passed tools, and cleaned up the mess afterward. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared you for your first time. You were handed the pliers. The patient was a middle-aged farmer named Edric. His tooth had been hurting for a week. His wife said he hadn't slept, eaten, or prayed today. He was desperate enough to let a teenager pull it out. You try not to tremble as your teacher walks in. Worms. Another method was heating a mix of wax, herbs, and goat fat, then dripping it near the gums to smoke the worms out. Spoiler alert, that never works. Eventually, you accept the truth, not about worms, but belief. People want a reason for their pain. No matter how ridiculous, it's easier to imagine a hungry worm than face decay, disease, and death. And so you carry on. The quacks, the monks, the bug killers. Just another day in the medieval mouth monster world. You've seen your master yank dozens of teeth from wailing villagers. You hold their heads steady, pass the tools, and clean up the mess afterward. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepares you for your first time. You get handed the pliers. The patient is a middle-aged farmer named Edric. His tooth has been aching for a week. His wife says he hasn't slept, eaten, or prayed. Today, he's desperate enough to let a teenager pull it out. You try not to shake as your master steps in, turns around, and nods. Go on, he says, arms crossed, apron stained. Time to treat yourself. Edric sits on the stool, knuckles white, eyes wide. You mutter something that might be a prayer. He replies with something that might be his last words. You spot the tooth, a rotten, black, cracked mess with gums swollen like they're about to explode. You clamp the pliers. Sweaty palms. Edric tenses. On 3. You whisper. 1. And 2. You twist. This is what you were taught. Don't wait for 3. It's mercy. Kind of. The tooth doesn't budge. Edric screams like he's being flayed alive because, well, he basically is. You tighten your grip, press harder. You hear a sickening crack. And for a moment, you think you did it until half the tooth pulls out, and the rest just sits there like a tiny, sharp dagger. The size of your teacher's ego. Keep going. The next few minutes are a bloody mess of curses, twisted metal, and panic. Finally, you yank out the last piece, fragments, nearly knocking you flat from the force. Edric falls forward, pale as death, mouth blazing red. You did it. Your hands are shaking. Your apron looks like you just slaughtered a pig. Yet Edric's still alive, probably crying, but grateful in that dazed, painful way only a medieval peasant can manage. You clean the wound with booze, slap on some herbs, and wrap it up. He thanks you with a bloody grin. You try not to cry, or puke, maybe both. Then your teacher pats your back. Not bad. He says, you just cracked the jaw a little. That night, you sleep with the tooth in your pocket, your first trophy, your first scar. After yanking a few teeth, you start noticing something that never goes away. Not in the workshop, not on your clothes, not even in your dreams. It's the smell. At first, it sneaks up on you. A faint sour note in the air. You think it's the stew boiling next door, or maybe your teacher's feet. But then you realize it's coming from the mouth. Rotten teeth have their own special stench, a nasty cocktail of pus, blood, fermented food, and that unmistakable fishy whiff of rotting flesh. Every time a patient opens wide, it hits you like a wall, and it sticks. It seeps into your apron, hair, fingernails. You start noticing other things too. The smell of fear, sharp, metallic, and real, especially when your patient is sweating through their shirt, eyes darting, knuckles ghost white gripping the armrest. Fear makes people stink in a very special way. It blends with the rotten teeth, garlic breath, damp sweat, and a faint whiff of despair. No candle or herbal bundle can cut through it. You stop trying. You also start keeping track of the number of people who faint before you even get near their mouths. You learn to start before they go down. You get good at guessing who'll scream, who'll pass out, and who'll try to run. Now you've got a system for that. Standard practice. Sometimes the rot is so bad, the teeth crumble under your tools like moldy bread. What grows isn't a tooth. It's a memory of a tooth, blackened and mushy. A leftover scrap of last week's meal and a future infection. You try not to breathe too deep, but it's useless. The smell has become part of you. You leave the workshop, and people instinctively step back. Kids cry when you pass. You've become a walking omen of the factory. One day, a merchant you helped a few weeks ago nods politely as he passes you in the market. Then he covers his nose with a cloth. You're used to that because in this line of work, you don't just carry tools and bandages. You carry the scent of every open mouth you've ever touched. And then some. Now, you don't think of mouths as part of a person. You think of them as battlefields. And you're sent in after the war. Every patient sitting in your chair carries a story between their lips, always written in rot, blood, and shattered enamel. Their mouths are disasters, caves of blackened roots, cracked teeth, exposed nerves, and gums that look like overripe fruit. Some teeth lean sideways, clutching their neighbors like drunken soldiers. Others are jagged and lonely, yellowed with age, soft to the touch. Beneath them, gums swell, red or gray from decay. You even see the smell of every open mouth you've ever touched. And then some. Now, you no longer see the mouth as part of the person. You see it as a battlefield. And you're sent in After the war, every patient in your chair carries a story between their lips, always written in rot, blood, and shattered enamel. Their mouths are disasters, caves of pitch-black roots, cracked teeth, exposed nerves, and gums looking like overripe fruit. Some teeth lean sideways, clutching their neighbors like drunken soldiers. Others grow jagged and lonely, yellowed with age, soft to the touch. And beneath them, swollen gums, red or gray from decay. You even see maggots, and not just once. You stop asking questions. You just pry them out and assess the damage. Some teeth wiggle when the patient breathes. Others shatter into pieces the moment your tool touches them. You've seen mouths with not a single intact tooth left. Just roots sticking out of, pus-filled holes, and then the infections. Oh boy. Boils under the tongue. Cysts behind teeth. Entire jaws pounding with every heartbeat. You've sucked out a pouch of pus the size of a walnut. The man thanks you through tears. That day was a good day. You work fast. Not because you're efficient, but because the longer you look, the worse it gets. These aren't dental checkups. They're triage. You don't fix things. You pull, scrape, and pray. You keep a bucket for the extra teeth. By noon, it's full. The stench hits your nose before the weight lifts. You start to realize people are defined by their mouths. Oh yeah. The blacksmith with an abscess under his tongue. The baker, bleeding gums when he blinks. The widow with 7 remaining teeth, all pointing in different directions. It's become your new normal. You try to keep your distance, but sometimes someone leans back, mouth wide open. And what? You see chills, you to the bone, not because it's worse than usual, but because you see yourself in it. That aching back at night, it looks familiar. You're not just the healer of broken mouths anymore. You're a jaw ticking on your own chair. Now, you're no longer scared of the screams. In fact, you barely notice them. They're the soundtrack of your job, echoing off stone walls and wooden beams like a choir of pain and regret. Each scream is unique, some shrill, some panicked, others low and hoarse like a wounded animal. You used to comfort them, hand them a warm cloth, whisper prayers, lie that it wouldn't hurt much. That stopped after the 5th tooth pulled, when the man bit through your glove and cried the whole time. Now there's no sugarcoating it. You don't have sugar anyway, just pliers, leather straps, and the kind of emotional distance only a medieval dentist can master. No anesthetic, most days. Not even herbal numbing. What you do have is a bottle of booze to dull the edges. And if you're lucky, someone to hold them down, preferably a spouse or a tough neighbor who doesn't mind blood on their sleeve. The process is simple. You wedge open the mouth, locate the sore tooth, twist, pull, or smash, depending on how stubborn it is. The patient howls, thrashes, calls on saints long dead, and you keep going because if you stop, things only get worse. Some scream before you even touch them. Others go stiff and silent. The kind of silence that means they're too terrified to breathe. You've had people faint, vomit, pee themselves mid-procedure, and you just keep working. Sometimes they shout your name, not in thanks, but curses You've been called the devil, butcher, hell's minion with iron pliers. Some even swear you were sent from hell to punish gluttons. You take that as a compliment. Then most patients don't thank you. They stagger away, clutching their bloody faces, muttering curses. A few nod. Fewer pay. Those who survive with teeth left are the closest thing you get to a 5-star review. But no one forgets you. Because in a world without comfort, you're the one trading big pain for less pain, and everyone will always scream for that. It eventually happens. You've handled dozens, maybe hundreds of screaming, writhing patients, dodged knee strikes, elbows, even an accidental headbutt from a panicked nun, but nothing prepared you for getting bitten. It started like any other procedure. A local miller, sweating buckets, growling through a swollen cheek, comes in, clutching his jaw like it's about to fall off. Just get it out. He growls. A classic tough guy. You get him in position, half-heartedly pray, as usual, and start checking the shark tooth. A real mess. Blackened, cracked, barely hanging on. You don't even need pliers yet. Just poke it with your finger to test movement. That's when it happens. He clamps down. Your finger gets caught between two, dozens, maybe hundreds of patients screaming, writhing. You dodge knee strikes, elbows, even an accidental headbutt from a panicked nun. But nothing prepares you for being bitten. It starts like any other procedure. A local miller, sweating and growling through a swollen cheek, walks in, holding his jaw like it might fall off. Just yank it out. He growls. Classic tough guy. You set him up, half-heartedly pray, like always, and start checking the shark tooth. A total disaster. Blackened, cracked, barely hanging in there. You don't even need the pliers yet. Just poke it with your finger to test the wiggle. That's when it happens. He clamps down. Your finger gets caught between two rotten teeth. And suddenly, you understand what real pain feels like. You scream. He screams. Someone else in the waiting room screams in sympathy. You try to pull your hand out, but it's too late. His jaw is locked tight, desperate. He's not attacking you. He's panicking. But your skin doesn't care about his intentions. It's breaking apart. Blood's filling your gloves. Your mentor rushes in, trying to pry his mouth open with the dull end of a key. Finally, it works. You stagger back, clutching your hand like it's on fire. One fingertip's ripped, half the nails gone. Your hand swells instantly, of course. No antiseptics, just booze, boiling water, and praying that God's not in a vengeful mood today. You wrap it tight and keep going. 5 more teeth to yank. Schedule's tight, and you need the cash. By night, your hand's red and throbbing. Infection hits fast because, surprise, mouths are full of disgusting stuff. You get a fever. For 2 days, you hallucinate chats with the Virgin Mary about MERS. Eventually, you mostly recover. Your finger never curls normally again. A permanent reminder. The miller sends you bread once a year. Feeling guilty and now toothless? After that, you switch jobs, work faster, smarter, and start using a metal probe instead of your finger to check wobbly teeth. Because in your line of work, the scariest bite isn't from dogs. You'd think nobles in silk cloaks and feathered hats would have better teeth. Nope. The richer they are, the worse their mouths rot. Why? Because they can afford luxuries. The poor never tasted sugar, candied fruit, imported wine, and pastries so sweet they practically melt your enamel on contact. You get summoned to manors and castles with polished floors but terrifying smiles. Behind powdered faces and fragrant cloaks are mouths in full rebellion, walnut-sized abscesses, gums like bruised fruit, and teeth so black you wonder if they're cursed. Yet the nobles expect grace, elegance, and discretion. They sit on velvet cushions while you kneel, staring into what looks like a honey-soaked battlefield gone rotten. They want you quiet, quick, and if possible, not to tell them exactly what you're yanking out. One noblewoman insists her tooth's just misplaced. You pull it out in 3 bloody pieces. No shouting like peasants. No. They moan dramatically, faint with flair, complain that herbal mouthwash is too bitter or linen is too rough. One lord asks you to stop pulling so he can write a poem himself. And then there's cosmetic dentistry, because if a noble loses a front tooth, it must be filled or replaced. You patch holes with wax, paint teeth white with lead. Yeah, toxic. And once carved a fake ivory fang, which promptly fell out at a party. They pay well. At least coins, chickens, rings, even cloaks, though they smell like wet dogs. Plus they expect favors, secrets kept, and egos stroked. You don't mind. Every time a duke or duchess opens their mouth expecting perfection, and you see the same pus-filled crater as any street beggar, it reminds you of something important. Decay is democratic, doesn't care how rich you are, and you're the great equalizer. The steady hand ready to remind everyone that beneath the silk and titles, it's all rotten the same, by now. Your reputation's well known, but not in the way you'd hope. You walk into a tavern, and the chatter dies. Kids hide behind their moms. A guy who once spat on your foot crosses himself, mumbling something about plague demons. Another carves a charm to ward off your curse. You're no hero, not even a healer. You're the tooth puller. And that means something dark to the villagers. You're a necessary evil, like famine or taxes. They only come when pain beats fear. No one visits a medieval dentist for fun. They wait until they're desperate, delirious, almost guts hollowed by infection. Some beggar on the street reminds you of one big truth. Decay is democracy. Doesn't care how rich you are. And you're the perfect balancing act, holding the reins, ready to remind everyone that beneath the silk and fancy titles, everything's rotted the same. By now, your reputation's ahead of you, but not the way you'd hoped. You walk into a tavern and silence falls. Kids hide behind their moms. The guy who spat on your foot and made the sign of the cross mutters something about the plague demon. Another carves a charm to wear around his neck to ward off your curse. You're not a hero. Heck, you're not even a healer. You're the tooth guy. And that's pretty dark news for the villagers. You're an evil necessity, like famine or taxes. They only come to you when pain outweighs fear. Nobody visits a medieval dentist just for fun. They wait until desperation hits. Delirium kicks in. An infection almost hollows them out. Then they show up at your door, trembling, hat in hand. At first, you try to be gentle. But that gentleness doesn't matter. The moment they see the pliers, fear takes over. Some flinch when you talk. Others won't look you in the eye. The bravest flash a nervous smile with whatever teeth remain. Nobody praises your work. When you do a good job, they scream. When you mess up, they scream louder. Save a life. Forget it. Pull a tooth. When you do well, they shout. When you mess up, they shout louder. Save a life forgotten. Yank a bad tooth legendary. A woman claims you pulled the wrong tooth. You didn't. Doesn't matter. The story spreads till you're the town's fake tooth thief for kicks. A bunch of boys follow you around town, singing a little song. One song for the farmer, two for the priest. Hide your teeth or he'll throw a party. You laugh because what else can you do? But it's bitter laughter. You never wanted to scare people. You wanted to help, still. Fear has its uses. People pay up faster. They listen. No one questions your price if they think you might pull the wrong tooth just to prove a point. And when someone collapses in the street with a jaw abscess, you're the first call. Not because they trust you, but because you're all they've got. So, you roll up your sleeves, open your kit, and step into the ring again. You're not loved, not admired, but you're remembered. When the plague hits, dentistry takes a backseat to pure survival. Blackness. Death couldn't care less about cavities. It floods the streets with fevered corpses and makes you wonder if that jaw abscess was just an abscess or the start of the end. Still, people come to you. Always. Not because you're a miracle worker, but because you've dealt with pus before. You've seen swollen, rotten wounds drained and bandaged with herbs. You've witnessed people scream from jaw infections. So, what's one more sore among friends? Your job shifts from pulling teeth to emergency bloodletting, swollen necks, black gums, lymph nodes the size of eggs. You heat your scalpel, pinch the skin, and cut. Pus bursts like a blister. You're not choking anymore. Haven't choked in years. Sometimes they live. Sometimes they don't. You start marking chalk on your doorframe, not out of pride, but to keep your mind sane. Payments get weird. No one has coins, so they pay with bread, jerky, or promises they won't live long enough to keep. A dying merchant hands you a ring. A widow gives you her late husband's boots. You sell what you can, bury what you must. The stench grows thicker. Your workshop becomes a clinic and a graveyard mashup. You stack firewood for warmth, but it's no use. The cold has seeped deep into your bones. In the silence come 3 patients in a row who never sit up again. Still, you stay busy. The plague is bad for bodies, but good for business. And people whisper about you. The one who sucked poison from my neighbor's neck. The one who pulled 3 infected teeth, and the man lived. The one who knows things priests don't. You don't correct them, because in an age where everyone's dying slow, being just a little less dangerous makes you strong. So, you keep cutting, sucking, bandaging wounds with moldy cloth, and praying. You don't sleep much. You talk only when necessary, but you keep living and working. In the plague era, you're not just the man with the pincers. You're the one they call when it's almost too late. It starts with a dull ache. Nothing serious. A sharp pain in the back after a long day. Easy to ignore. But you know better. You've seen this story 100 times in hundreds of mouths. It always starts from nothing. Then it becomes everything. At first, you pretend it's just tiredness. You rinse with booze. You chew your clothes. You rub your jaw when no one's looking. But inside, you know rot has set in. You try to fight it. After all, there are mouths worse off than yours. Farmers with no teeth. Nobles whose breath kills flowers. You survived other people's screams? Surely you can survive your own. But the pain grows. It crawls up your jaw. into your ear, behind your eye. You stop eating. You stop talking. You start dreaming about that tooth. The same tooth over and over, falling out, wriggling worms, whispering Latin to you. You drink. You chew on your clothes. You rub your jaw when no one's looking. But inside, you know the rot has come for you. You try to push through. After all, there are mouths worse off than yours. Toothless peasants, nobles, with breath that could wilt flowers. You survived other people's screams. Surely you can survive your own. But the pain keeps climbing. It creeps up your jaw, into your ear, behind your eye. You stop eating. You stop talking. You start dreaming about the same tooth over and over, falling out, crawling with worms, whispering to you in Latin. You consider asking your apprentice for help, but he's still green, hesitant, still wiping tools on his sleeve. So one night, under the dim light of the workshop, you do what you've done for years. You pull your own tooth. You clamp a block of wood between your jaws, steady your hand, and dig in with the pliers. You've done this hundreds of times. You know exactly how to grip, twist, and yank. But you've never done it on yourself before. The pain is indescribable, not because it's worse, but because it's yours. You groan, half in anger, half in agony. Sweat soaks through your long coat. You taste blood, then more blood, and finally some kind of relief. You drop the tooth into a tin bowl. It clinks against the others. You stare at it for a moment. Just another broken thing in a room full of broken things. You clean the wound. No need to bandage it. Not by accident, but out of pride. You'll heal or you won't. That's always been the way. The pain lessens, but the sting lingers, because for the first time, you understand what every scream really means, and now you carry it, not just in your hand, but in your empty jaw. No grand finale for a medieval dentist, no church funeral, no golden plaque, no choir praising the pulled teeth and drained wounds, just an old man in a blood-stained apron leaning over a bench, tools worn down to twisted metal prongs. Your hand aches now. Your knees clench tight like worn-out teeth. Your vision blurs into the evening, and your ears ring with echoes of thousands of screams from the past. Patients still come, but you move slower. Speak less. Grip the pliers with fingers that can't close without pain. One day, you reach for bread and feel it. A crack. A soft crumble in your mouth. Another tooth gone yours again. You don't bother keeping it. You've forgotten. You don't eat apples anymore. Now you drink water and only chew when you have to. Your tongue explores the gaps in your mouth like a soldier wandering a ruined battlefield. Every year, fewer survivors remain. Sometimes you wonder if the villagers will remember you when you leave. The man carrying death's breath and mercy in his hands. The one who pulled more teeth than most could even imagine. But really, they won't build you a tomb. You're not a priest, not a knight. Just the guy who helped them scream less. Your grave will be shallow. Your name carved on a wooden plank. Maybe. Maybe not. But the work you did lives on. In every mouth that still chews without pain. In every child who dodged a deadly jaw infection, in every noble hiding rot behind a fake smile and never saying thank you, and in the bucket of teeth under your workbench, a silent monument to a life of blood, rust, and guts. When you die, no mourning procession awaits, just silence in the workshop and the lingering scent of a long day. Eventually, someone else will pick up the pliers, a younger, hungrier, less haunted soul. The screams will return, but now your hands must stay still. Your breath grows weaker, and somewhere in the village, a kid will feel a sharp toothache. They'll ask, "Where can this man stop it?" But you'll be gone. No, tombstone, just gums. Before silk, before linen, before anything that might be called fashion. There was only skin. Skin exposed to sunlight, wind, cold, bugs, and every other natural assault nature could throw at us. In the earliest chapters of human history, clothing wasn't about style. It was about survival. The first people lived in harsh, unforgiving environments and had to invent fast if they wanted to make it through the night. The solution: whatever was around animal hides after a hunt, flexible bark, woven fabrics, and even twisted grass belts and crude skirts. Not pretty, but effective and right. Here, in this primal moment, clothing was born, not fashion. Shields, animal fur, soft, flexible bark, woven cloth, even twisted grass into belts and crude skirts. Not pretty, but it worked, and right. Here, in this primal moment, clothing was born. This wasn't fashion. They were shields. Animal pelts could keep you warm in winter, but they also made you smell like the next lion's dinner. Still, for early humans, warmth beat style every time. We wrapped ourselves in living skin, tied it with sinew or vines, and hoped for the best. But over time, even these crude coverings started to carry symbolic meaning. The man wearing the biggest bearskin was probably the guy who killed the bear. The woman in the fancy woven grass skirt, maybe she was the elder, the storyteller, or the healer. Clothes began to be about more than just protection. They whispered status. The earliest archaeological evidence of a sewing tool, the bone needle, dates back nearly 40,000 years, showing we already knew how to tailor animal skins to fit better, not just functional, thoughtful. That's human nature. And as we started migrating to different climates, icy tundras, scorching deserts, humid jungles, our clothes evolved too. In cold places, animal furs and tight wraps kept us warm. In hot climates, we switched to breathable, loose fabrics. This wasn't just invention, it was adaptation. So even though we might picture early humans living wild and free, the reality was way more practical. From the moment we started covering up, clothes became our first tech, a silent revolution in sewing fibers and pelts together, driven by need and a little pride, and this was just the beginning. When you think ancient Egypt, you imagine pyramids, gold masks, and jackal-headed gods. But look closer, and you'll spot something else. Everyone's rocking fine linen. Not silk, not wool, but linen. And not just any linen, smooth, bleached, and neatly pleated. Egypt's hot. Dry climate made linen the ideal fabric. It's light, breathable, and you can layer it without roasting. Made from flax, Linen took serious effort, harvesting, soaking, beating until soft, spinning into fine threads, then weaving into fabric. This wasn't everyday gear. Linen was valuable. Pharaohs, priests, even the dead wore it. Mummies wrapped carefully in layers of it. Egyptians believed clothes mattered not just in life, but in death. Your outfit protected your identity in the afterlife. A carefully wrapped mummy wasn't just stylish, it was spiritually fortified. Social status was truly shown by what you wore. The upper class flaunted sheer linen robes, often pleated or dyed white, a color linked with purity and divine power. Ordinary workers wore simpler pleated skirts, sometimes just a piece of cloth wrapped at the waist. But they still appreciated linen's cool elegance. Kids usually went commando until puberty, but even their first clothes marked their growing up. And of course, jewelry sealed the deal. Wide collars of gold and gems, lapis lazuli amulets, beaded sandals. A noble's wardrobe might include wigs, kohl-lined eyes, and faintly scented cones on their heads at fancy parties. Fashion in Egypt wasn't about vanity. It was ritual, identity, and rank. Priests, who had to stay ritually pure, wore only the finest white linen, no animal-based gear allowed. No wool, no leather. Clothes weren't just fabric. They were spiritual armor, separating the sacred from the mundane. Even slaves and servants had attire fitting their roles, though rarely decorated. Still, whether working fields or palace halls, linen shaped Egyptian fashion for thousands of years. So while other civilizations were still bundled in skins and wool, Egypt pioneered one of humanity's first fabric revolutions: smooth, sunlit linen stitched to last forever. If Egypt spun gold from flax, Mesopotamia wove an entire civilization from wool, linked to purity and divine power. Regular workers wore simpler pleated skirts, sometimes just a piece of fabric wrapped at the waist, but they still appreciated the cool elegance of linen. Kids usually went naked until puberty, but even their first clothes marked their coming of age. Of course, jewelry completed the look. Wide collars of gold and gems, lapis lazuli amulets, beaded sandals. A noble's wardrobe might include wigs, kohl-lined eyes, and fragrant hats at fancy parties. Fashion in Egypt wasn't vanity. It was ritual, identity, and rank. Priests, who had to keep ritual purity, only wore the finest white linen and avoided any animal-derived clothing. No wool, no leather. Clothes weren't just fabric. They were spiritual armor, marking sacred from profane. Even slaves and servants had clothes suited to their jobs. Though, everywhere you looked, sheep's wool was the MVP of trade, temple offerings, and even taxes in Mesopotamia. Seriously, it was kind of a big deal. Temples basically ran livestock and textile production like tiny empires. Their outfits, part sacred ritual, part bureaucratic uniform. The typical dude's outfit was an outer cloak, a wrap skirt, or a long tunic made of fringed wool, giving off major scruffy animal hide vibes. That fringed wool made them look like someone just skinned a sheep and threw it on as a jacket, which honestly isn't far off. Over time, though, it leveled up into stylized ceremonial wear, sometimes even royal attire. Kings, priests, and gods themselves were often shown rocking the kanuki outfit, a top-tier religious status symbol. Women's clothes were sewn similarly, but sometimes hit ankle length and left one shoulder bare. Mixing convenience with a bit of style, these outfits weren't cut and sewn like fancy Egyptian linen. They were wrapped and pinned, more sculpted art than needlework. Your social class dictated the outfit's details. The upper crust wore deep indigo or dark red dyed wool, sometimes jazzed up with fringe or fancy embroidery. Servants and laborers got the rougher, plain stuff. And like in Egypt, kids ran around naked until a certain age. Turns out, modesty was a pretty flexible idea in early civilizations. Mesopotamians also rocked wide belts, usually leather or wool, to keep their outfits from escaping. These belts were status symbols too, decked out with bronze studs or carved with names, prayers, or protective symbols. Headgear was all the rage, especially for men. Straw hats, headbands, and turbans shouted identity and rank. Soldiers and messengers wore simple leather caps, while priests and royalty went for the fancier, more complex hats. Jewelry sealed the look: earrings, bracelets, and necklaces made from gold, silver, lapis lazuli, and agate. Even the poorest folks usually sported at least a basic bead necklace or amulet for protection. So while Egypt was drowning in linen, Mesopotamia rocked rough. Warm wool packed with meaning. Their style wasn't just about fabric, it was power, piety, and arguably the world's first wardrobe. While Egypt owned linen and Mesopotamia flaunted wool, the people of the Indus Valley quietly revolutionized clothing with something soft, breathable, and way ahead of its time: cotton. Yep, actual cotton. And they did it over 5,000 years ago, centered around cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. The Indus Valley civilization left no massive temples or royal tombs, but they did leave a mark as a highly organized, clean society that really cared about fashion. Their clothes were clean, minimalist, and practical, perfect for the hot and humid climate of what's now Pakistan and Northwest India. We know this thanks to terracotta figurines, seal impressions, and some insanely detailed sculptures. Men usually wore short pleated skirts or wraps around the waist, while women wore longer garments, sometimes draped over one shoulder. Think of it as the great-great-grandparent of the sari. Both men and women rocked simple yet elegant clothes, easy to move in and warm enough. And yes, they were the first known civilization to grow cotton. This wasn't just practical, it was revolutionary. Cotton's breathability and softness made it perfect for everyday life, especially compared to the heavier animal fibers used elsewhere. The Indus people spun, wove, and probably dyed their fabrics, using natural dyes like indigo or turmeric, both local to the area. Minimalist doesn't mean boring. Many small statues show women wearing elaborate jewelry, bracelets, earrings, and beaded necklaces. Hair was styled or braided, and archaeologists found decorated combs and cosmetic boxes, hinting at daily grooming rituals. There's even a famous bronze sculpture called the Dancing Girl, dated around 2500 BCE. She's rocking just a handful of bangles, but her pose, confidence, and makeup say it all about their cultural comfort with grace and simplicity. Notably, there was very little waste or excess shaping Indian fashion, no obsession with flashiness, just carefully made, locally sourced clothes suited to climate and daily life. No gold-plated cloaks or over-the-top bling, thick coats, but only with the sleek elegance of sharp lines and smart fabrics. In the quiet streets of Harappa, fashion wasn't flashy, but it was way ahead of its time. Around 2000 BC, when the Manawan folks popped up on Cree Island, fashion took a giant leap from just being practical to something way more expressive and honestly pretty awesome. The Manawan didn't just wear clothes to survive the Mediterranean climate. They dressed to dazzle, to move, to seduce, and probably, most importantly, to dance. Manawan outfits were light and colorful, designed not just for warmth, but for visual wow factor. Guys usually rocked loincloths or pleated skirts, sometimes fancy with patterned belts, sometimes bare-chested with tight belts showing off their waists. But it was women's fashion that truly grabbed your attention. Minoan murals, like the ones in Knossos, show women wearing outfits unlike anything seen in other ancient cultures. Tight tops with layered, ruffled skirts, sometimes bell-shaped, often pleated, and with seriously daring front openings that showed their chests. Nope, not an accident. This was fashion, maybe ritual, maybe status, but definitely intentional. These corset-like tops gave women an hourglass figure, cinching the waist while still letting them move freely. The skirts swung impressively with every step, especially during athletic dances and religious ceremonies the Manawan were famous for. Clothes here weren't static. They were all about motion. Every layer, fold, and color had a purpose and movement. The fabrics were probably linen or wool, dyed bright blues, reds, yellows, and purples using plant-based pigments, decorative trims, embroidery, and even imported threads added visual spice. Manawan tailors knew their stuff. They weren't just cutting fabric. They were building identity. Both men and women wore exquisite jewelry necklaces, bracelets, earrings often made from gold, silver, and semi-precious stones like agate and turquoise. Hair was long and styled, sometimes curled or braided, topped with elaborate hats for ceremonies. Even kids were dressed carefully. Showing clothes weren't just about function, but also status, age, and social role, and given women's prominent role in Minoan art. Their fancy outfits probably meant more than just looking good. They could be signaling authority. The Manawan family took fashion off the loom and onto the stage, turning every skirt hem into a theatrical masterpiece and every outfit into a living sculpture in motion in ancient China. Clothes weren't just fabric. They were philosophy, hierarchy, and imperial control tools. At the heart of it all was silk. Gorgeous, shimmering silk. So prized that people once thought it was woven by gods. Actually, it came from humble silkworms. But the discovery's impact spread across continents and centuries. Silk's origins trace back to the Neolithic era, with the earliest confirmed evidence around 2700 BC. Legend has it, Empress Lazu was the first to spot a cocoon falling into her tea and noticed the delicate thread inside. Whether true or not, silk production quickly became one of China's best-kept secrets, with death as the penalty for revealing how it was made. By the Shang and Zhou dynasties, silk had become a symbol of Chinese refinement. Unlike rough wool or stiff linen, silk was soft, light, cool, and shiny, perfect for China's varied climates and held dye beautifully. Royal yellows, deep reds, and rich blues were woven into intricate patterns. Dragons symbolized the emperor, clouds the scholars, and waves represented court officials. Clothing was strictly ranked by class. The more silk you wore, the higher your status, cut, color, and even sleeve length said everything from social rank to your day job. Commoners were banned from certain colors or weaves, while nobles floated through palaces in robes that practically screamed power with every step. The Han Dynasty, from 206 BC to 220 AD, turned silk into a diplomatic weapon. Rolls of silk were swapped with nomads, used as tribute, and eventually sent west along the Silk Road, which is how this route got its name. Chinese clothing, especially among the elite, now featured wide-sleeved robes, sashes, and multiple layers. Folding the robe from left to right became a whole cultural identity thing. Women's fashion included high-waisted skirts, flowing long sleeves, and fancy hairpins. Men's clothes focused on grace and humility, perfect for Confucian ideals. Clothing was expected to reflect inner virtue and cosmic balance. Silk wasn't just a luxury item. It was a soft but strict language in ancient China. What you wore wasn't just about looks. It was who you were, how you thought, and where you belonged. In ancient Greece, fashion wasn't about stealing the spotlight. It flowed, wrapped, and whispered elegance. Greeks didn't care much for stitching or patching. Their approach to clothing was architectural, even sculptural. With just one piece of fabric, they created outfits that said movement, intellect, and grace. No zippers, no sewing, just geometry, draping, and deep respect for form. The basic Greek outfit was the chiton, a rectangular linen or wool cloth folded and pinned at the shoulders with brooches or tied with a belt, then cinched at the waist, depending on the fabric and drape. The chiton could be breezy and casual, or formal and layered. Men wore knee-length chitons, women ankle-length. It was a picture of identity, fitting age, gender, and occasion. Outside, people might wear a himation, a thicker cloak draped over one shoulder, useful for warmth, modesty, or drama, depending on how you rocked it. Think of it as a wearable toga, symbolizing dignity and contemplation, often associated with philosophers, politicians, and the wise elders. Greeks believed clothes should reflect inner virtue. Simplicity was king. Flashiness, not so much, especially in Athens, where public modesty was a citizen's virtue. Spartan men were even tougher, often barefoot, wrapped in rough red wool, valuing austerity over looks. But don't let simplicity fool you. Greek clothes could be stunning. Wealthier citizens wore chitons dyed and embroidered in saffron, indigo, or deep red, decorated with swirling patterns and mythological motifs. Jewelry, hairstyles, and makeup amped up the overall look. Women decked their hair with ribbons, crowns, or intricate braids. Men took care of their beards with pride rivaling their oratory skills. Footwear was optional. Sandals were popular. But many Greeks preferred bare feet, especially in temples or ceremonies. Clothing wasn't just to cover up. It was a social conversation. A well-dressed himation could scream nobility. A ragged chiton might signal mourning or madness. Greek statues often mimicked real people, preserving the folds of clothing in marble. Even gods wore robes and chitons, reminding mortals that beauty lies in form, not flesh. Finally, Greek fashion wasn't what you wore, but how you wore it. With thought, calm, and above all, philosophy woven into every fold. If Greeks showed identity and elegance, Romans took it and turned it into order. Roman clothing wasn't just comfort or style. It was law, rank, and culture wrapped up in one. What you wore in Rome told the world exactly who you were, how much power you had, and even where you could sit in the Senate. The most iconic Roman garment was the toga. Himon the massive semicircular wool cloak up to 20 feet long, meticulously wrapped around the body. It was bulky, impractical, and required practice to wear correctly. But that was the point. Only Roman male citizens got to wear the toga. It was the symbol of Roman citizenship and, broadly, Roman superiority. Togas came in different styles and colors depending on your status. The toga virilis was a plain white cloak worn by adult men. The toga praetexta had a purple border reserved for the judge and a few priests. And the pica toga, a full purple cloak with golden embroidery, reserved exclusively for emperors and victorious generals. Purple dye came from the murex sea snail and cost so much. It was basically liquid gold, but most Romans didn't parade around in togas every day. The tunic, a simple belted garment made of wool or linen, was their daily wear, short for men, long for women. Slaves and laborers wore plain, undecorated tunics, while senators sported wide purple stripes called latus clavus. The stripe's width could distinguish a senator from a knight. Women wore long, sleeveless dresses, usually layered over the tunic, tied at the shoulder and waist. Married women often covered their heads with a pallium, a rectangular shawl adding modesty and flair. For high-class ladies, appearance was power. Fabrics got more colorful, jewelry flashier, and hairstyles fancier with every dynasty. Romans loved their footwear too. Sandals, boots, and indoor slippers all screamed social status. A soldier's uniform didn't match a senator's shiny red shoes. Even slaves had assigned outfits, usually rough tunics, but they could dress up if their masters wanted to show off. In Rome, nothing was random. Even your clothes shouted your citizenship, class, gender, morals, and ambitions, all wrapped up in wool and pinned with brooches. Clothes were basically walking resumes of social status. When the Roman Empire fell and the toga disappeared, a new fashion wave rose from the barbarians, that lovely Roman term for anyone beyond their borders. But these outsiders, Goths, Franks, Celts, Saxons, and Vandals, weren't just crude brutes. Their clothes were practical and actually foreshadowed medieval fashion wardrobes. Northern Europe's brutal climate was way too cold and muddy for those skimpy tunics. The barbarians preferred warmth, mobility, and practicality. Wool was king, thick and insulating. Cloaks, trousers, long-sleeved tunics, and fur-lined boots were the standard gear, built for riding, trekking through forests, and war. One of their biggest fashion gifts to the world, pants. Yes, pants, that everyday essential we take for granted, were a foreign concept to toga-wearing Romans. Initially mocked, pants became essential when Roman soldiers wore them in colder regions. Eventually, they spread all across Europe. Men wore braccae, early long pants, with tunics, often belted across the chest with leather. Women layered long woolen skirts, usually belted, with long cloaks pinned with brooches or decorative clasps. Colorful dyes were a big deal. Reds, blues, and greens came from plants and minerals. With patterns like checks and stripes popping up, Celtic tartan was on the horizon. Clothing also showed loyalty and tribal identity. Brooches, belt buckles, and necklaces weren't just practical. They carried symbols of lineage, mythology, or rank. For example, Celts crafted intricate metalwork, blending art and fashion. Hairstyles and grooming were diverse too. Long hair and beards for warriors, braids for women, and even facial tattoos in some Celtic tribes. Jewelry made of bronze, amber, and glass was popular with both men and women. By the time the Western Roman Empire fell, barbarian clothing had laid the groundwork for medieval European fashion, layered, woolen, and practical, less ritual, more survival, but still packed with meaning, beauty, and cultural pride. So, from the linen dresses of pharaohs to the wool cloaks of future kings, ancient clothes stitched more than just bodies. They wove entire civilizations together. Queen Tati was born into a world on fire, not with flames, but with ambition, betrayal, and slow empire rivalries for the fragile Levant. Her homeland, the kingdom of Amuru, wasn't a powerhouse like Egypt or the Hittites. This tiny country, chopped up and constantly stuck between bigger powers, was seen more as a handy buffer zone than a real sovereign nation, sitting where western Syria and northern Lebanon are now. Amuru was all hills, trade routes, and competing loyalties. By the time Tati was born, maybe in the 14th century BC, this kingdom had become a hot diplomatic mess between Egyptian pharaohs, Mitanni lords, and the expanding Hittite kings. Not exactly an easy place to rule, but definitely important. Tati's childhood was soaked in court intrigues, foreign envoys, and the constant anxiety over invasions or rebellions. Whether she was born royal or married in, she was schooled in the arts of diplomacy, survival, and ceremonial leadership from a young age. In Amuru, the queen wasn't just decoration. She was a negotiator, a symbol of stability, and sometimes the glue holding fractious courts together. This region was in flux. The once mighty Mitanni kingdom was collapsing, losing land and influence to the rising Hittites. Egypt under Amon, Hatshepsut, and later Akhenaten still claimed Amuru as part of its sphere. Meanwhile, local rulers were weighing their options. Should they swear loyalty to Egypt, gamble on the Hittites, or try to play both sides? Tati grew up in this storm. A woman climbing the male-dominated political ladder. That alone is impressive. Being mentioned in Hittite diplomatic records and formal letters between kings wasn't just about status, but power. She wasn't a background character. She was at the table. And though historical records are scarce, her very name reveals something important. At a time when most women were erased from stone and clay, Queen Tati made her mark, and that was just the beginning. In the late Bronze Age world, diplomacy was brutal, and alliances rarely lasted past harvest season. Yet Queen Tati appears in history not as a footnote, but as a political heavyweight, something almost unheard of for a woman back then. She's mentioned in the Hittite diplomatic archives, especially in letters about Amuru's fate. Her presence there says a lot. The context of her appearances in these records is crucial. When Tati took power, Amuru's elite had a tough call: stick with Egypt's weak grip or ally with the rising Hittite Empire. This wasn't a small choice. Egypt had long claimed Amuru as a vassal territory. But the Hittites were expanding fast, peeling away Egypt's northern allies. In this dangerous political game, Tati's name emerges. The Hittites were negotiating terms with Amuru's leaders, and Tati was involved. Some interpretations of Hittite texts suggest she might have been a regent or co-ruler, maybe during a succession crisis, or even a widow of a previous king. Either way, Her role wasn't just ceremonial. She had enough clout to make the most powerful Near Eastern empire of the time the Hittites recognize her. Tati's political weight hints at something deeper: the flexible, pragmatic nature of power in Amurru. Unlike Egypt or Assyria, where royal women were mostly sidelined, smaller kingdoms sometimes allowed or even demanded queens step in when dynasties weakened, or when political survival called for broader alliances. We have no idea what Tati looked like. No statues, busts, or paintings. But from the rough lines on clay kune figures, we find something even more valuable: clear evidence of her influence. She stood among kings, ambassadors, generals, and lords, holding her ground. In an era when marriage sealed deals and betrayal was just a feast away, Tati's presence in diplomatic documents shows she wasn't a sidekick. She was a main player. Understanding Queen Tati's world is like stepping into the arena of kings, envoys, generals, and lords, where she held her own. In a time when marriages were business deals and betrayal was just a party away, Tati's diplomatic presence proves she wasn't an extra. She was a lead player. Getting into Queen Tati's world means stepping into the political power whirlpool. Queen Amurru's kingdom sat like a fragile pebble stuck between three tectonic plates grinding each other to bits. The Hittite Empire was rising from Anatolia. Egypt ruled the south, and the Mitanni kingdom was collapsing to the east. Tati's reign played out in the shadows of this power struggle, where every player was either a threat or a weirdly convenient opportunity. Egypt, under the 18th dynasty, had long treated Amurru like a cog in its imperial machine. Pharaohs like Thutmose III and Amenhotep III set up local vassals, collected tribute, and demanded obedience. But Egypt's grip on northern Levant was starting to loosen, especially during the religious chaos under Akhenaten. Egypt got distracted, vulnerable, and way more into gods than generals. Meanwhile, distracted, vulnerable, and obsessed with gods instead of generals. Meanwhile, Mitanni, once a regional powerhouse, was rapidly falling apart. Internal conflicts and military failures cracked open invasion chances from east and north. Their old allies were watching like hawks. Amurru, a former Mitanni vassal, found itself increasingly isolated. Then the Hittites showed up under the ruthless, brilliant leadership of Suppiluliuma, the Mai king. This guy wasn't happy just ruling Anatolia. He had his eyes on the Syrian corridor, including Amurru. Suppiluliuma launched deep military campaigns into the Levant, smashing Mitanni's resistance and taking city after city. His goal, simple: control trade routes, kill Egypt's influence, and reel strategic spots like Amurru into his orbit. This was the world Tati had to navigate: a power triangle, each corner on fire with ambition. She couldn't afford a single screw-up. Choosing Egypt risked Hittite revenge. Backing the Hittites could piss off local factions loyal to the pharaoh. And allying with a dying Mitanni, that was a gamble straight out of a soap opera. But amidst the storm, Queen Tati wasn't disappearing. She stayed politically present, popping up in talks with the Hittites, probably weighing loyalties of every caravan passing through her kingdom. She didn't just survive, she had to hustle. Her reign, or regency, unfolded during one of the late Bronze Age's wildest roller coasters. And instead of getting crushed by the chaos, Tati seemed to use it not to dominate, but to endure. At some point in Queen Tati's life, a political earthquake shook Amurru's foreign policy foundations. The kingdom officially broke free from Egypt's influence and allied with the Hittite Empire. This decision wasn't taken lightly. It redrew Amurru's spot on the map, triggered Egyptian backlash, and cemented the kingdom's role in one of the late Bronze Age's most tangled diplomatic webs. Hittite king Suppiluliuma, a seasoned strategist and expansionist, began pulling smaller Levantine kingdoms into his territory through military muscle and savvy negotiation. When Amurru's leadership, probably Queen Tati, front and center, agreed to switch sides, the deal wasn't just handshake stuff. It got sealed in a treaty preserved in Hittite cuneiform archives. The treaty survives even though it focuses on Amurru's male ruler, likely Tati's husband or relative. The key point, Tati's name pops up in related diplomatic letters, proving she wasn't some silent partner. She likely played a major role in negotiations, especially handling domestic blowback and foreign expectations. The treaty spelled out the main obligations. Amurru would now be a vassal to the Hittite king. In exchange, the Hittites promised to protect them not only from Egypt, but also hostile tribes and internal rivals. This was more than a handshake. It was a survival pact. Egypt didn't take this betrayal lightly. Pharaoh Akhenaten saw this switch as outright treason. The Amarna, letters, a bunch of clay tablet correspondence between Egyptian officials and their vassals, hint at diplomatic rage and urgent demands. Queen Tati's court must have braced for retaliation. But strategically, the alliance with the Hittites was a smarter choice. Sapaluma's military campaigns shattered Mitanni's power, and Egypt was sliding into a hot mess of religious and political chaos. Tati's decision, and yes, let's call it her decision, was a cold, calculated move. The treaty with the Hittites was a total game changer. It bought safety for Amurru, but at a steep price. The kingdom wasn't some neutral buffer zone anymore. It picked a side in the Empire smackdown, and once you pick a side, there's no going back. Queen Tati didn't just watch this shift happen. She helped steer it. The moment Amurru teamed up with the Hittites, Queen Tati and her court became the eye of a geopolitical storm. Egypt was furious, once seen as a loyal vassal. Amurru was now a traitor in Egyptian eyes. And back in the Bronze Age, betrayal didn't just spark angry letters. It meant payback. The Amarna letters, a stash of diplomatic mail between Egyptian pharaohs and their vassals, spill the tea on this tension. Egypt accused Amurru's leaders of treason, questioned their honor, and demanded obedience. Tati's name isn't dropped much in these texts, but her presence in Hittite records from the same time shows she was deeply involved behind the scenes. What followed wasn't just armies clashing, it was a battle for loyalty. Egypt pressured neighbors to isolate Amurru. Border skirmishes threatened to blow up. Tati had to deal with more than outside threats. There was internal drama too. Not everyone in Amurru was on board with ditching Egypt for the Hittites, especially those who'd benefited from Egypt's longtime patronage. Traders, military leaders, even royal family members probably questioned the wisdom of this alliance. Tati had to tread carefully. Her position was bolstered by her closeness to the throne, whether as queen, mother, regent, or top consort. Her experience and diplomatic skills were key to keeping the kingdom united. She wasn't just managing battlefield tactics. She was navigating the emotional fallout of betrayal, the collapse of old alliances, and the psychological toll of war. But betrayal can also be a path to renewal. By siding with the Hittites, Amuru earned a new identity, not some small Egyptian vassal, but an important Hittite ally in the Levant. This switch also came with economic perks. Trade routes shifted. Hittite merchants and envoys started rolling in. Roads were secured under new terms. For Queen Tati, the cost of betrayal was learning to survive under pressure. Her legacy boils down to one thing: masterful diplomacy. She didn't get the luxury of certainty. Every choice risked invasion or civil unrest. But in the Bronze Age chaos she endured, persistence was often the biggest win. In an era when most queens were nameless, unknown, and mostly forgotten in official records, Queen Tati of Amuru left something extraordinary behind a name carved in clay. Her presence in Hittite diplomatic archives isn't just a footnote. It's a rare glimpse of a Bronze Age woman's role and influence on the global stage. Tati pops up in treaties and letters between Amuru and the Hittite Empire, especially during the reign of Suppiluliuma, the Anatolian mastermind strategist. Cuneiform tablets from the Royal Archive at Hadassa show Tati wasn't just a ceremonial figure. She either took part in diplomacy firsthand or held enough power that her presence demanded respect. One letter specifically describes the political situation in Amuru after they bailed on Egypt. It names Tati along with other political heavy hitters, suggesting she had a say in how the kingdom positioned itself, handled crises, and managed its alliances. Was she a queen regent during a king's minority? A widow guarding her late husband's legacy? Or maybe even the one who, the only authority in an era when men were MIA? We can't be totally sure. But one thing's clear: her name wasn't just for show. It actually worked. The Hittites mentioning a queen's name in their diplomatic language was anything but normal. It meant she had recognized influence, maybe even respect. Hittite diplomacy was cold and brutally practical. Titles weren't handed out like participation trophies. If Tati got named, it was because she was part of the power machinery. This is huge when you consider that most Bronze Age international letters were between kings. Queens were usually quiet allies. If mentioned at all, it was just in passing. But Tati's presence is carved right into documents tracking alliances, wars, tributes, and betrayals. Through these clay tablets, she didn't speak for herself, but through others' acknowledgement. And that alone makes her pretty special. She lived in a noisy world of war and shifting alliances, yet her voice got recorded in the silent bureaucracy of ancient empires. Queen Tati's name echoes with quiet power. By linking Amuru to the Hittite Empire, Queen Tati secured her kingdom's survival. But it came at a cost. This alliance brought protection, but also supervision. And the head of that supervision was Suppiluliuma, the towering Hittite king who reshaped the Near East with iron, will, and natural strategic genius. For Tati, navigating her new kingdom under his watch meant walking a tightrope between cooperation and submission. Suppiluliuma wasn't a passive overlord. His control over client states, like Amuru, was absolute in every way except in name. He sent messengers, demanded tribute, and expected strict compliance. Tati and her court were expected to follow treaty terms rigorously, provide military support, secure trade routes, and let Hittite influence seep into their government. Chances are, Tati had Hittite advisors at court and maybe even Hittite troops camped nearby. Her decisions, both domestic and foreign, were no longer entirely her own, but she wasn't powerless. Tati's skill wasn't about challenging Subilium, but managing his expectations, earning his trust, and using the alliance to strengthen her own rule. Her real challenge might not have been the Hittites, but internal, local elites, merchants, and religious figures used to Egyptian backing might have resented the new Hittite customs and oversight. Tati had to play the diplomat, soothing her powerful overlord while quelling discontent at home. That took top-notch diplomatic skills, plus deep insight into shifting personalities, politics, and loyalties. And the Hittite king trusted her court enough to enforce loyalty. That says a lot in an age when failed vassals were quickly replaced or destroyed. Tati of Amuru held firm. Her leadership was solid. Her presence in diplomatic records continued. This wasn't the freedom of a sovereign queen. It was something far more precarious. A middle ground between empire and people, survival and autonomy. And few could play that role better. Tati lived under Subilium's shadow, but she wasn't overshadowed by it. She knew how to bend without breaking. And in the brutal calculus of Bronze Age politics, that was a win. Queen Tati's survival in history is rare practically, a miracle. The Bronze Age wasn't known for preserving women's names, let alone their achievements, yet Tati's name survives, etched in Hittite diplomatic texts not as a wife, not as a king's shadow, but as someone actively involved in politics. Her legacy, though faint, shines in stark contrast to the silence that blanketed many other women of her time. By the late Bronze Age, royal women had significant influence, big league. Queens like Tyr and Nefertiti, or Hittite royal ladies like Puduhipa, who would rise decades later to become fierce co-rulers. But most of these women came from powerful dynasties or married mighty kings. In contrast, Tati came from or operated in a border state always stuck between conquest and collapse. That makes her presence in foreign archives all the more remarkable. We don't have statues or sculptures of Tati, no golden death mask, no temples with her face carved in stone. Her kingdom wasn't about grand architecture, but survived through diplomacy, kept alive by treaties, strategic marriages, and compromises. Her legacy isn't etched in marble, but on fragile clay tablets, easy to lose, but somehow still whispering her name through the ages. She's a rare example of a Bronze Age woman wielding power during a time of massive geopolitical upheaval. Tati might have been a queen regent, a ruling wife, or a king's widow, but whatever her title, she held real influence. She navigated wars between superpowers, betrayals from former allies, and Middle Eastern political chaos without losing her grip on power. And, more importantly, her story challenges the idea that ancient women were just passive shadows behind male rulers. Tati wasn't passive or forgotten. She was named, recorded, and remembered, even if briefly, by scribes who usually only wrote about kings. Her story reminds us that history is often unfair in memory, but not always blind. Some voices, even faint ones carved on clay, can echo across millennia. The last years of Queen Tati fade into silence. Mentions of her slowly vanish. And the clay tablets that once held her name disappear, replaced by ominous signs, Signs of a world starting to fall apart. The late Bronze Age was winding down, dragging with it the complex web of diplomacy, trade, and royal alliances that had tied the region together for centuries. We don't know how or when Tati died. No records of her burial, no inscriptions praising her achievements. But we do know Amaru, like many contemporary city-states and kingdoms, was about to be swept into the chaos modern historians call the Bronze Age collapse. A mysterious era lasting decades of destruction, population decline, and cultural fragmentation. Roughly from 1200 to 1150 BCE, the ancient superpowers toppled like dominoes. The Hittite Empire fell. The Mycenaean palaces in Greece were abandoned. Cities burned from Anatolia to Canaan. Causes, scholars still argue: war, famine, drought, earthquakes, internal rebellions, or the sudden arrival of mysterious sea peoples, probably all of the above. Happening at once. A perfect storm of disasters. Amuru, caught between a dying Hittite and a rising Egypt, under Ramses III, wouldn't escape unscathed. Its once blessed strategic location turned into a curse. Armies marched through. Supply lines dried up. Alliances crumbled. The political chessboard Tati carefully navigated got flipped. The board was upside down, pieces flying everywhere. But hey, just knowing her name is pretty extraordinary. Tati may have vanished from the main stage of history, but she survived and might have ruled during one of the most dangerous and crucial periods of ancient history. Her decisions, alliances, and survival strategies make sure she's not forgotten, even if history tried to erase her long ago. In the end, Queen Tati wasn't part of a glorious conquest or mighty dynasty. She's a rare case, a political survivor amid a collapsing world. And even if her legacy got buried under rubble, turned to crumbling clay, her name still stands, defiant, solemn, and unforgettable. A queen with no tomb, but no loss of memory. Challenge, solemn, and unforgettable. A queen with no tombstone, yet never forgotten, long before drills and explosives showed up. The mountain now called Mount Rushmore stood tall, majestic, untouched by any president's chisel. To most early 20th century Americans, it was just a regular granite peak in the rugged Black Hills of South Dakota. But to the Lakota Sioux, it was sacred. They called it Paha. The Black Hills were officially given to the Lakota by the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty, a legal promise that this land was theirs forever. Spoiler alert, forever turned out to be pretty short. Just a few years later, gold was found. And suddenly, every prospector in the West showed up. The U.S. government canceled the treaty. The hills were taken over. The Lakota pushed aside. Their sacred space was sold off, mined, and eventually blown to bits with dynamite. By the 1920s, America was hungry for legends. World War I shock had passed, but a new identity crisis was brewing. A country racing through modernization, industrial boom, and desperate for a unifying national story. Enter Don Robinson, a South Dakota historian with a wild idea: carve giant statues of American heroes into a mountainside to lure tourists and celebrate national greatness. Robinson first thought of Western icons like Lewis and Clark, Red Cloud, and Buffalo Bill. But when Gutzon Borglum, an overambitious sculptor obsessed with grandeur and nationalism, joined the party, things got way bigger. Borglum pitched a crazier plan: carve colossal portraits of four U.S. presidents right into the granite cliff. The mountain wasn't random either. It had hard granite, was visible from miles around, and caught the sunlight just right. But here's the kicker. This project sat on land stolen from Native Americans, a fact most supporters happily ignored. Back then, the mountain didn't even have the name we know today. Rushmore came from a New York lawyer who visited in 1885. This land, once alive with tribal stories and ancient rhythms, was about to become something totally different, a monument to empire, ambition, and American myth-making. The mountain face was blank, but far from meaningless. The man behind those giant heads wasn't your everyday artist. Gutzon Borglum was part showman, part sculptor, a guy obsessed with legacy, nationalism, and pure spectacle. When he arrived in South Dakota in the mid-1920s, Borglum didn't plan to carve a mountain. He wanted to carve his name into history. Born in 1867 to Danish immigrants in Idaho, Borglum studied art in Paris and soaked up classical sculpture and 19th century European romantic nationalism. He worshipped size, symbolism, and the idea that art should spark national pride. His work was all over America, and he was known for bold, big projects, but it was his brief, controversial stint at the Confederate Memorial on Stone Mountain, Georgia. That really built his initial fame and infamy. That project crashed and burned over money and creative clashes. Borglum left the South amid scandal and a canceled contract. But he took something precious with him: hard-earned skills with granite, explosives, and mountain carving techniques. When Don Robinson from South Dakota pitched the giant sculpture tourism idea, Borglum saw a second chance, bigger, better, and this time with full artistic control. But he wasn't interested in local heroes. He saw something grander, a shrine to American democracy, where presidents, in his eyes, shaped the nation's destiny. He picked George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, and Theodore Roosevelt. Each symbolized a pillar of the Republic: founding, expansion, preservation, and development. Borglum's involvement turned Rushmore from a state tourism gimmick into a federal monument. He had powerful connections. Even President Calvin Coolidge gave his blessing. And Borglum knew how to secure funding, grab media attention, and create a patriotic icon. For Borglum, art was a tool to build legends. But his vision came with plenty of controversy. Amid storms of accusations and canceled contracts, but he carried something precious: experience with granite, explosives, and absolute mountain carving skills. When Don Robinson from South Dakota pitched the idea of boosting tourism with a giant sculpture, Borglum saw a chance to reboot, bigger, bolder, and this time with total artistic control. But he didn't want to carve local heroes. He saw something grander, a shrine to American democracy, where presidents, in his opinion, shaped the nation's fate. He picked George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, and Theodore Roosevelt, each representing a different pillar of the Republic: founding, expanding, preserving, and developing. Borglum's involvement turned Mount Rushmore from a small state tourist spot into a federal monument project. He had some seriously powerful connections. Even President Calvin Coolidge gave it his blessing. And Borglum knew how to secure funding, grab media attention, and create a patriotic icon. For Borglum, art was a tool to build mythology. But his vision came with controversy. He had strong nationalist beliefs and past ties to white supremacist groups like the Ku Klux Klan through the Stone Mountain Project, which cast a shadow over his legacy. Still, his skills were undeniable. And when he looked at the Black Hills, he didn't just see stone. He saw immortality waiting to be carved. Mount Rushmore had never chiseled with just hammer and chisel. It was blasted, drilled, and hammered into life with precision and fury. Controlled chaos led by Gutzon Borglum and a crew of over 400 folks. From 1927 to 1941, the mountain constantly echoed with explosions as granite made way for a vision. The work began with George Washington's face, chosen for both symbolism and practicality. Washington's image, over 60 feet tall, became the template for the rest. But carving a mountain isn't like sculpting marble. Granite's tough, unforgiving, and prone to cracking. To pull this off, Borglum and his team relied on a unique cocktail of art and engineering. It all started with explosives. The blasting crew used carefully calculated charges to remove huge chunks of rock, layering the mountain's surface down step by step. After each blast, drillers and foremen climbed hundreds of feet up scaffolding to fine-tune the shapes with jackhammers and hand tools. Guys dangled from ropes, carving eyebrows and noses from sheer cliffs. It was a job that demanded skill, was dangerous, and often super noisy, but oddly intimate. Each face took years to finish, with no room for mistakes. Despite the massive scale, the tools were pretty basic. Workers used compressor-powered gear and a lot of creativity. Safety was a big deal. And surprisingly, no one died in 14 years of construction, a fact Borglum was more than happy to brag about. Many workers were miners, stone cutters, or unemployed folks from the Great Depression. For them, it was a paycheck, a job, and a piece of history. Progress was slow and funding unstable. The Depression hit right as the project started, causing delays and constant federal bailouts. Borglum, a political activist himself, secured New Deal funding and kept spirits high with patriotic speeches. As each president's face emerged, first Washington, then Jefferson, Lincoln, and finally Roosevelt, the mountain became a national legend. Not just for its likeness, it was about ideals. These weren't just men. They were symbols carved into the same rock as the founding myths of the nation. But behind every blast and carved line was a contradiction, a monument to freedom, carved into land stolen from people who were forced to work in economic despair. For millions of visitors, Mount Rushmore screams patriotism, a temple to democracy etched in stone. But for the Lakota people, it's a wound. This monument was carved into the Black Hills, or Baja Sapa, a sacred site for the Lakota, long before the first explosion echoed off those cliffs. To them, it's not just granite, it's holy ground. The 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty guaranteed the Black Hills to the Lakota forever. But when gold was found there just a few years later, the U.S. government tore up that agreement. Soldiers came, settlers followed, the land was seized, and with it, the heart of Lakota culture and spirit. When Gutzon Borglum and his scaffolding showed up, the Lakota lost more than territory. They lost faith in every treaty ever signed. And then, to rub salt in the wound, the faces of 4 U.S. presidents were chosen to be carved into those hills, including George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, 2 men deeply tied to the displacement of indigenous peoples and the expansion of settler colonialism. According to the Lakota, Mount Rushmore isn't an honor. It's sacrilege. It stands for broken promises, stolen land, an ongoing erasure of indigenous sovereignty. And it starkly contrasts with nearby Thunderhead Peak, home to another giant sculpture, the Crazy Horse Memorial, commissioned by Lakota leaders as a counter-monument. Still unfinished, but growing steadily. The Lakota weren't consulted when Mount Rushmore was proposed. Their protests were ignored. Their cultural claims to the land were dismissed by federal courts and public opinion. Even today, they keep fighting for their rights through activism, legal challenges, and symbolic acts like the Supreme Court's 1980 ruling in United States. Sioux Nation admitted one thing: Black Hills were illegally taken. The Lakota were offered compensation. Spoiler alert, they said no thanks. They wanted their land back. So, even though Mount Rushmore looks all quiet and permanent, it's a hotbed of unresolved drama. This isn't just a monument, it's more like a mirror, depending on where you stand. You see pride or pain reflected back. George Washington's face is the first to emerge from the granite. A 60-foot-tall portrait of the man often called the father of the country. Gutzon Borglum picked Washington to symbolize the birth of the U.S., the Revolution, the ideals, and the original identity of this newborn republic. But as granite chips flew, that face looked more like a statue than stone. Myth carved in rock. Sculpting Washington started in 1930 and set the style for the whole monument. His face took years of work from blasting to delicate chiseling and was revealed in stages. Borglum claimed the expression showed calm, authority, and the vision of a timeless leader. Perfect symmetry was a must. His nose alone stretched over 20 feet. Next up was Thomas Jefferson, originally planned to be carved to Washington's right, but the granite there was way too unstable. Part of the face got destroyed. Jefferson got shifted to Washington's left side, and they had to start all over again. An expensive fail in time, money, and morale. But eventually, Jefferson's face appeared, staring off toward the Black Hills with distant determination. Jefferson was chosen to represent the expansion of the U.S., especially through the Louisiana Purchase. But his role carried more weight than just politics. Jefferson was complex a writer about freedom, but also a slave owner, a visionary Democrat, but one who saw native lands as territory ripe for American takeover. Carving these 2 founders into sacred Lakota land wasn't just symbolic, it was provocative. Washington oversaw military campaigns against native tribes. Jefferson authored policies encouraging westward settlement, setting the stage for decades of forced removals. But for many Americans, these men stood for reason, liberty, and the Enlightenment values that shaped the Republic. Borglum saw them as gods of America's temple. He wanted their faces to last centuries, looking toward the country's future with timeless authority. When Washington and Jefferson were finished, Mount Rushmore was starting to take shape. A sculpture not just of 4 men, but of the story America tells about itself. Whether you see founders or conquerors depends on which side of history you're standing. After Washington and Jefferson were done, Mount Rushmore became a national symbol. But Gutzon Borglum wasn't finished yet. To complete his vision of America's growth, he added Abraham Lincoln and Theodore Roosevelt. The 2 presidents weren't picked for their proximity to the founding, but for how they led the country through crisis and transformation. Abraham Lincoln, the third face carved, was Borglum's favorite. He admired Lincoln for uniting the country, preserving the Union during the Civil War, and ending slavery. To Borglum, Lincoln symbolized the preservation of the nation. His somber face and deep-set eyes carry the weight of a leader in the nation's darkest hour. Carving Lincoln's face into granite took years from 1937 to 1939 and demanded obsessive attention to detail. His deep eyes, high cheekbones, and iconic beard were slowly chiseled, often by hand with a pneumatic hammer. Then came Theodore Roosevelt, a pretty surprising pick at the time. Borglum chose him to represent America's modern growth, industrial power, economic ambition, and rising global presence. Roosevelt was. Then there was Theodore Roosevelt, a pretty surprising pick at the time. Borglum chose him to represent the growth of modern America, industrial power, economic ambition, and rising global presence. Roosevelt was Borglum's buddy, and his progressive reforms, anti-monopoly crusades, and conservation efforts made him, in Borglum's eyes, the ideal model of a dynamic leader. Roosevelt's face, carved tightly between Lincoln and Jefferson, was a technical nightmare because of the recessed position and those thick-rimmed glasses. A detail painstakingly crafted in metal rods to suggest lenses. Including him stirred quite a bit of controversy. Critics argued that, together, Lincoln and Roosevelt completed the four-part saga: birth, expansion, preservation, and growth. It's basically a timeline parade of American ambition, seen through the eyes of the country's most powerful leaders. But each of these men, especially Lincoln and Roosevelt, carried a messy legacy stuff like native policies, imperialism, and civil strife. Still, their faces, now bigger than life, are expected to stick around forever. Carved to survive thousands of years, their stony expressions slowly took shape, and Rushmore stopped being just a piece of art. It turned into a symbol, not of who these men really were, but who America wanted them to be. Building Rushmore wasn't just an artistic feat. It was a political hustle from day one. The project got swept up in American nationalism, economic desperation, and bureaucratic headaches. Carving four giant faces into a mountain took more than just good eyesight. It took cash, lots of cash. And Gutzon Borglum hunted every dollar like a hawk. When work started in 1927, the economy was still humming along. But just 2 years later, the Great Depression hit, and funding dried up nationwide. Infrastructure projects collapsed, banks went belly up, and people lined up for bread like it was a Black Friday sale. But Rushmore kept going. Why? Because Borglum knew the power of showmanship and pride politics. He didn't see this monument as just a presidential memorial. He sold it as a shrine to democracy, a beacon of hope in dark times. Lobbying Congress, cozying up to presidents, chatting up anyone who'd listen, that was Borglum's game. He wasn't just an artist, he was a propagandist, and Rushmore was his stage in the 1930s. Roosevelt's New Deal started funneling money into public works, and Borglum scored federal funds through the National Park Service, turning this local curiosity into a national project. The idea of carving American greatness into a mountain suddenly became an economic salvation jobs, tourism, and a patriotic booster all rolled into one. But the fundraising journey was bumpy. Borglum clashed nonstop with the oversight board, rejected every creative compromise, and demanded full artistic control. He often exaggerated progress to get more money and even tried to expand the project beyond 4 faces with plans for full-body statues, horsemen, and a huge archive room behind the mountain's head. None of that ever happened. Public opinion was all over the map. Many felt pride, seeing it as proof America could build and survive even in hard times. But critics cried waste, especially when people were starving. Others questioned the political motives behind picking these particular presidents. All white, all male, all symbols of expansionist policies. Still, the money kept flowing. That dream, expensive and flawed as it was, marched on. For Borglum, every donated dollar was a vote of faith not just in his monument, but in America's legend itself. By the late 1930s, Rushmore was taking shape. 3 presidents were done. The 4th was in progress, and scaffolding still climbed the rock. But then, in March 1941, the monument's creator, Gutzon Borglum, suddenly died from surgery complications. He was 73. The man who dreamed, fought, and turned this vision to stone was gone, and the project stalled, losing its driving force. Without a driving force, Borglum's death sent shockwaves through the whole project. He wasn't just a sculptor. He was the architect, fundraiser, public face, and visionary who held it all together. Without him, no one had that mix of artistic insight and political savvy. There were blueprints. Yes, plaster models too. But the energy was gone. His son, Lincoln Borglum, a quiet, dedicated man who had worked under his father's watch for years, took over. He was capable and committed, but way less flashy. While Gutzon dreamed big full figures, engraved inscriptions, fancy finishing touches, Lincoln took a practical approach. With time running out and funds tight, he focused on finishing Roosevelt's face and protecting the site. Then another blow hit World War II. As America turned its attention overseas, priorities shifted. Federal budgets got redirected to the war effort. Patriotism moved from monuments to manpower. Suddenly, there were more urgent things to build than statues. By October 31st, 1941, work officially stopped. The carvings were left as is, unfinished according to Borglum's original design, but still impressive. The planned archive room, to preserve American documents and ideals, remained a secret chamber behind Lincoln's head, unfinished and unused. Decades later, a sealed historical archive was finally installed there. Yet, even unfinished, Mount Rushmore was an idea fully realized. The 4 presidential faces stare out at the world. The Black Hills, not exactly what Borglum imagined, but strong enough to become a symbol. Borglum's death changed everything. The mountain froze the dream in place. The monument, once bursting with ambition, turned solid, still, and silent, just like the rock it was carved from. Today, Mount Rushmore is one of the most recognizable landmarks in the U.S., a grand symbol of national pride, tourist magnet, and political headache. To some, it's a spectacular tribute to American ideals. To others, it's a painful reminder of empire's cost. Its meaning shifts depending on who you ask. Over 2 million people visit this spot each year, gawking at the 6,000-pound faces of Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, and Roosevelt. They come for photos, patriotism, and awe at this engineering marvel. But underneath it all, Rushmore's legacy is anything but simple. The monument stirs debates about history, race, land rights, and identity. Critics say it celebrates presidents who oversaw USS territorial expansion by directly harming Native American nations, carving their faces into sacred Lakota land seized after breaking federal treaties many see as an ongoing injustice. To the Lakota, Rushmore isn't a monument to freedom. It's a scar. At the same time, some folks view this monument as proof of American grit, a product of skill and stubborn will during the Great Depression. A salute to fierce leadership. It's shown in movies, ads, textbooks, and political rallies, often shorthand for America itself. Even presidents have spoken up. Ronald Reagan called it a monument to America's exceptionalism. Barack Obama visited and acknowledged its beauty, but also pointed out the contradictions. Activists have protested there. Tourists have gotten engaged. There, it's a pilgrimage site, both sacred and controversial. Meanwhile, the unfinished archives room behind Lincoln's head now holds copies of the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and a short biography of Borglum. They rest in a sealed titanium vault inside the mountain, waiting for future civilizations to find them. In the end, Mount Rushmore is more than sculpture. It's a story carved into granite, edited by history, and debated by every generation. A lofty, unfinished national legend just like the country it represents.